Hello and welcome to the Industry Podcast. I'm your host, Lenny Tiller, along with our other co-host, Ernest Snooks, and we are excited to introduce a very special guest. Someone myself and Ernest have been looking forward to speaking for a long time. Renaud Brossard. I hope I said that right. And if
you got it perfectly.
You can lambast me.
No, you got it perfectly.
Awesome. How are you tonight, Ernest?
I'm pretty good. It's a bit frosty here in Stephenville, as you know. I don't say our guest knows, but Renaud, how's Montreal?
Honestly, we just had a huge snowstorm. It finally stopped snowing. I'm so happy. It's been a mix of a lot of ice early in the week, and then a massive snowstorm icing all the ice patches. So it's extremely slippery out there. So I feel you.
We're kind of going through the same thing. We've had a winter full of snow, torrential rain, the most flash freeze warnings I've ever seen in my life. And yesterday was a bit of a crazy day. Yesterday we know what's going on in the Ukraine, and then we get a message from school that school is closed because last weekend, there was a bunch of roads around the school that I work at. It encompasses a lot of communities, all had washouts. So we had to close school for a day. We got enough fixed that they could open school again. And then yesterday, it rained all day on Wednesday. Froze really, really fast overnight. And there's a detour going through a small community of St. George's. So you go halfway through St. George's and up a hill. Well, that hill was so icy that transport trucks couldn't get up. One tipped onto someone's house. The other one went off the road. The road was completely kiboshed, and everything was shut down again yesterday. So we've been having quite the winter in Newfoundland, and it's been nuts.
Yep. It has, honestly, even here, and once again, like the Newfoundland and Labrador winter, it seems like a lot worse than what we get out here. But it has been the weirdest thing. There's been basically, extremes of temperature, but there's been no day where you can say, that's like a proper January day or a proper February day. It's been like, it's either -40 or +5.
Yes.
It's either like 30 centimeters of snow or 30 millimeters of rain.
Yes.
So,
yeah. But I guess we're here to talk about the wonderful world of Newfoundland political finance and how wonderful we do.
I mean, maybe that's the one thing that makes this winter seem a little bit better, I guess.
Right, because in Newfoundland, if there's one thing that we all know how to do, especially on the provincial government, is manage money properly.
Oh yeah, we're experts. We're just the shining beacon of fiscal responsibility in this fine country. But before we do that, how about you introduce yourself, because a lot of people might not know you.
Sure thing. I guess. So what I do, I'm the interim Atlantic director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I am also known as, not him, by a couple of government ministers. Actually, a true story, by the way. But what I do basically is I fight for taxpayers every day to make sure that you get to keep more of your hard-earned money in your pockets instead of having it go to a bureaucrat's pockets. So that means advocating for less government waste, advocating for lower taxes. And of course, and I think this is one of the most important things we do as well, is advocating for more accountability from our government leaders. And these three things are kind of interconnected. But that's more me about the job. As a person, I studied business, then started to go into politics, kind of using my business studies to know how to analyze government budgets, to dive into government budgets, to read government budgets. I'm one of those weird numbers, those weird people who will be able to infer more about a place from an Excel spreadsheet than a whole text on Word. So that's basically who I am. Oh, and I like shoes, I like scotch, stuff like that. But I don't think that those later parts are more relevant to that podcast than the first ones.
Yeah. Hey, listen, anything to do with drinking is definitely related to this podcast.
Yes,
especially when you look at a Newfoundland and Labrador budget. And it's funny that in Newfoundland and Labrador, all our municipalities are expected and are under balanced budget legislation.
Which is good, by the way. Which
yes.
is a good thing.
The Newfoundland and Labrador, I've had this debate before with the inter-party folks that I'm connected to, and we say as much as that's a good idea, we've spent so much that we can't even have balanced budget legislation at this point without making 3/4 of the province basically homeless, because we have so much demand on the government that it would have to be down the road. But it's wild.
It is wild, but here's the thing about balanced budget legislation provincially. Government ministers are always going to pitch it as if it's like you're forced to have a budget. There's no balanced budget legislation I've seen at a provincial level that actually does that. What they actually do is they tell government ministers that if they're not able to balance a budget, they'll have to take a bit of a pay cut. And I think just in terms of intergenerational responsibility, to give to government ministers kind of a second thought about going into deficit. You know, they kind of have to think about whether or not it's necessary. And if it's necessary, they're going to make some personal sacrifices. I think that would be the right thing to do. And to have those government ministers try and pretend as if it meant they're not able to run deficits, I wish that's what it was. That's not the case. It just means that if they do run deficits, they'll lose a couple of grand at the end of the year.
Right. Right. Yeah, and it's certainly a misconception. And the day I brought it up, I was definitely batting out of my weight class, and I could not defend the statement at all. But I was like, it makes sense. We should just do it. Which, of course, holds no weight at all in an argument.
But I mean, like the situation with Newfoundland is complicated, to say the least. How would you rate the province's financial kind of responsibility and the way we use it, you know, on a scale, on whatever scale you'd like to use?
I don't think there's a proper scale for it. So look, to be fair, you're talking to someone who has never seen a government budget he actually liked. So that's not exactly good starters for government of Newfoundland and Labrador. But what really worries me is when I look at the financial situation of Newfoundland, because of course, you know, we talk a lot about a government debt, and there's a lot of numbers that get thrown around. Ultimately, there's one key number. It is a gross debt, because that's what you pay interest on. Like, sure, Newfoundland and Labrador has assets to kind of compensate for that debt, but you're not paying interest. You're not reducing your interest based on those assets. That number, just for the government alone, so you're not including Newfoundland Hydro. I was going to say Nalcor, but I guess that's going to be a thing of the past. You're not including Newfoundland Hydro. You're not including all those other crown corporations. Just a gross debt for the government is about 25 billion. 25 billion, that's 60%, 67% of the province's economy, its GDP. When you look at economic literature, any jurisdiction that gets over 75 to 100% of GDP, so there's some disagreement in the literature as to where it stands, but somewhere between 75 and 100% of GDP in government debt is going to see less investment and a lesser economic growth. And now you're telling me that the government of Newfoundland and Labrador itself, without the feds, without all the municipal debt has been taken on, has 67% of GDP. In debt, this is something that is harmful to the province economically. It means there's less investment that gets into the province. There's less jobs that get created, and less jobs that get created means less people paying income taxes in the province. It is affecting everything down the road, and that is the one thing that worries me. It is that level of government debt.
Yes, and that is something that, you know, I've. Yeah.
Go ahead, Ernest.
No, go on. I mean, that's something. Yeah.
Well, one of you two, please.
Yeah, if you look around our province, we are certainly aging, which means we do have a heavy out-migration problem of people our age. Like myself and Ernest are a rarity, and Steve-Mo, two guys in their early 30s, living and working and trying to make a go of it in our hometown is a rarity. And it's that way across the province. So what's going to happen? Like, I live with my elderly grandparents. So their days of being contributing taxpaying working citizens are over. We need to take care of those folks now, and I firmly believe in that. But what's going to happen is the more we go down this road of spend, 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 it's okay, I think, to be a social province. We are. We've always been since 1949. But we need to find a way to balance that, take care of our citizens while also growing our economy, growing our population base, and bring our young people back. And we haven't been able to figure out how to do that.
You know, and there's one thing that really resonates in what you said. It's the fact that, yeah, you still need to be able to take care of people that are not going to be in workforce, because, you know, no one wants to work when they're, no one wants to keep working when they're 85. I'm 29 right now, and I'm hoping I'm going to be retired by the age of 85. Yes. We need to be able to keep keep caring for people, and that's exactly the thing I see with government, that it is putting that in jeopardy. What we risk seeing right now is the fact that we're the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, and to be fair, like every other province in this country, is spending a lot of money it doesn't have to pay for services today, while putting in jeopardy its ability to pay for services later. So there's a very good report done every single year by the Parliamentary Budget Officer in Ottawa. Now, these are government employees who are nonpartisan, who just look at the financial statistics of the federal government and the provinces and try to see whether or not they're sustainable. What a PBO has shown is that for Newfoundland and Labrador, there's a 4.5% of GDP gap. Sorry, I've got a number sheet next to me because there's a lot of numbers in the research I did. I want to make sure I get them right. I don't want to say anything wrong. But at 4.5% of GDP, that's a $1.7 billion gap in the budget between what the province is spending right now and what is sustainable. And that's a major issue. And sure, there's two ways to go at it. One of them is to lower spending, but the other one is, of course, trying to create more opportunities to increase revenue. That doesn't mean hiking taxes. That means creating more good quality jobs, well-paid jobs, so that more Newfoundlanders and Labradorians have the ability to pay taxes and higher taxes than what they're able to right now.
Definitely, and that's something that I've I mean, me and Lenny talk about this pretty much all the time, especially like on our we have like a weekend kind of lunch breakfast thing. So you know that's literally, there's nothing social. It's literally just all politics, like 99.9% of it. And one thing that I'm very, very passionate about is kind of growing the economy in Newfoundland and Labrador. Like I'm a very kind of small business focused individual. I believe that's absolutely essential. And I mean, I've done a lot of economic reading. You know, I've read my Von Mises, my Murray Rothbard, and my favorite is Hernando de Soto. Very good kind of policy ideas on kind of small startup businesses, and that's something that I think is very critical. And the problem with the Newfoundland government is that they don't really like to focus on those entrepreneurs, those startups, those really, you know, take a while to grow kind of businesses. They want, you know, someone who's established, someone who has money. They're going to hire, you know, 50 to 100 people right off the bat. And the problem is too, is that they go ahead after that and they just subsidize the heck out of them. And really it negates any of the benefits.
I got to start with a short parenthesis. You'll have to send me some recommendations for some books from De Soto. I'm familiar with Von Mises. I'm familiar with Rothbard. Huge fan of Hayek as well. But I haven't read De Soto yet, and I want to read more. But you're absolutely right about this. And one of the ways to actually do this, kind of economic stimulation for small businesses, for new entrepreneurs, is to look at the way that the government does it now and look at how it can be reformed. Now, one of the things, and this is one of the things I've talked about in every single budget submission I've ever written to any government, because every single government is guilty of doing this. But one of the things that I like to recommend is to take all the money that the government takes to subsidize businesses. Take all of that money, put it against the corporate tax revenue that the government gets, and instead of subsidizing, getting that same amount in tax cuts. And the fact is very, very simple. It's not the government from the top down that's going to know very well which company is going to go well or which sector is going to go well and try to develop the economy one business at a time. That's not how it works. Newfoundland and Labrador's prosperity does not depend on one or two businesses. It doesn't depend on Oceanex. It doesn't depend on a couple of offshore rigs. It depends on every single part of the economy, including, of course, Oceanex and the offshore rigs and all of that, but also including the local grocery store, including lumber companies, including all different sectors of the economy that are not necessarily held equally. By reducing those taxes, it's making it more attractive for those other companies to invest, because when you try and find where you're going to establish your business, you're not doing it because you get a tax credit in 1 year and then have to pay a lot of taxes next year. You're going to do it where it's most viable for a 20, 25, 30-year investment. So a 1-year tax decrease doesn't really have a lot of impact, or a 1-year subsidy package doesn't have a lot of impact. And what you can do with that is take all of those subsidies, reduce the corporate income tax with it, and that way you're helping small businesses, you're helping large businesses, and you're helping every single kind of business that might want to come to Newfoundland and Labrador to develop their business.
Yeah, we're certainly not in attractive spots right now. That's my personal opinion, of course. Of people looking to grow, there are times they look at Newfoundland and Labrador, but it's mainly for resource, mainly offshore. And now we've put the kibosh on seismic. So now we can't test right now. We can't look. We can't explore for more reserve. For the interim, they're saying. But I think now that it's gone, it's probably gone. I think they've made up their mind that Muskrat Falls is the way they want to go, and that you need to buy that power, and it's going to be very expensive. And now there's a new subsidy, but there's also a bone in that subsidy, and so. I wish I was more briefed on that announcement that happened with Ottawa coming in, but to me, it just looked like another loan. Here's more money to reduce the cost, but what that means is, Renaud, if you ever move to Newfoundland, you'd be paying for it. Myself and Ernest are going to pay for it later on, so it helps our seniors. Excellent. It helps our low income right now. Excellent. When I'm my grandparents' age, I probably can't afford to live in my home if I can afford to buy a home now, which I cannot.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not fixing any problems. We're putting short-term solutions on a long-term issue. And there is no long-term effect. And everyone just says, take the pain away now. Once I'm dead, it doesn't matter.
To be fair, the loan for Muskrat, it is a loan, but it is coming to reduce the liabilities that government is going to have in terms of high interest payments. And in that sense, it is helping the province. But I think it should sort of serve as a lesson, not as a lesson because of hydro projects. I don't think that's the case. I think it should just serve as a lesson for the kind of top-down development projects that get imposed by the folks at Confederation Building on the province, instead of projects coming from the province and facilitated by the folks at Confederation Building. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. By reducing the corporate tax rate, sure, there's going to be a couple less red ribbons that the ministers are going to get to cut by saying we did that by spending this much money on it. They're not going to be cutting as many red ribbons, but there's going to be more businesses opening. It's going to be more attractive for foreign businesses to come and establish themselves here. The fact is, when businesses look at where to establish their next factory or their next base of operations, or however you want to call it, subsidies is one of the latest things they look at. Once they've established some place that's good enough, then they'll try and get subsidies to Sweden to buy it. What they look at is there a educated workforce? Newfoundland and Labrador has that. Is there some good transportation infrastructure? There's a lot of airports, there's a lot of seaports, and there's a lot of roads in Newfoundland and Labrador. So it has that. They look at, of course, the tax environment. Because once again, you're getting subsidies in year one, but then you're going to be stuck paying taxes for 20, for 25, for 30 years. That has a lot, that is a significantly bigger cost. So taking those subsidies away, reducing the corporate tax rate instead would actually help a lot more. And First of all, it wouldn't be done at any cost to the provincial government. It's not like they would lose on revenue on one side and not have any difference in spending. They're taking 100, in this case, it'd be 101 million that they're doing in spending and switching it to cut revenue instead. It is at zero cost to taxpayers, but what it would do is it would reduce the corporate tax rate by 27%, both for small businesses and for large businesses. And ask any business owner in Newfoundland and Labrador if they could save 25% on their provincial corporate tax, but to save that 25% of their provincial corporate tax, a large company shouldn't get a special check for a couple $1 million. I bet you most business owners are going to say that's exactly what they'd want.
Well, I definitely never thought of it that way before.
No, I haven't either, because I mean, like the other thing, in addition to kind of the taxes, it's the red tape. I mean, and that's kind of a huge problem, I guess, almost anywhere. But I mean, Newfoundland especially, because I mean, there's literally a fee for everything, and I mean, like I work in sales. And I mean, I see it, and I mean, I see how difficult it is for people to set up businesses. Mostly it's around automotive. So I mean, there's people trying to set up a garage, and the amount of effort it takes to get that, get the equipment, to get the licenses, to get all the fees and everything like that paid off in it, it's immense. And then, you know, there's the taxes, and I mean, and then you got to consider the population around here. I mean, the population in Newfoundland is, despite what the numbers say, the average income is really not that high. I mean, it's actually a lot lower, because I mean, there is a lot of poverty in Newfoundland. I mean, our labor participation rate is not exactly the best. I mean, I believe it's around
I think
54%.
Yeah, I saw something somewhere in between 50 and 60. But even more worrying is that despite the low labor participation rate, there's still a 13% unemployment rate. And that to me is more worrying, because that means there's people that are part of the labor market. There's 13% of people part of the labor market that are looking for a job actively and not finding one. That's a lot of people, and a double-digit unemployment is quite high. And of course, we've had COVID, we've seen the effects, and we know that not every single job has been regained everywhere. That's true. But the province has had a double-digit unemployment rate for years now. This is not exactly new. And this is something that's quite worrying. These are people that want to work. They want to find a job. They want to be, basically, they'd like to be able to pay some taxes and to contribute to government coffers as well. I think they still contribute to society. They would like to be able to contribute to government coffers as well. Not so much because they want to pay taxes, but because they want to get more money, and it's understandable. And these people are not able to find a job. That has significant impact. You know, there's that 13%, that's 32,000 people. It's a lot. It's a lot of families that are directly impacted. While you were talking about this, you actually made me think of something, because you were talking about red tape. I haven't found it. I was looking for it. I haven't found it again, but there's a very good report that the Canadian Federation of Independent Business puts out every single year about the cost of regulations to small, medium, and large businesses. And they do it for every province. And yes, part of the cost is for all of those permits, but one of the largest costs is for all the little regulations that take a couple of hours away from entrepreneurs. Because that means instead of spending those hours growing their business or trying to find out where, trying to find out where they can expand or how many more employees they can hire, or how they can make their business more profitable so that they can further expand at some point, maybe, instead of spending the time doing that, they're spending a lot of time, a lot of hours, just looking at government requirements and making sure they meet every single one of them. And reducing that would free up a lot of time. And of course, for large businesses, they can hire lawyers to do that. They can have specialized employees that just focus on that. But for your small business, is the owner that's going to have to do it. And it's a lot of time that they prefer to spend on growing their business instead of meeting some regulatory requirements.
And you're absolutely right. And I'm actually glad you said that, because and this is why I think you're really going to like DeSoto, because that's something that he talks about. He talks about the problem with the kind of, I guess, what was it, bureaucratic hours that kind of take, and it's a huge problem. It was crazy. Like, I never really realized it until I really read one of the books. It's called The Other Path. Like I said earlier, like you asked, I'll send you a few of his works. It's fantastic.
Oh, please do.
But no, it'll blow your mind. But the thing about it is that, and this is Newfoundland. Newfoundland is bureaucracy. If you really had to think about it, it's a very centrally planned kind of economy. It's almost a favorite. It's almost like, how do I describe it? It's very favoritist. And I mean, and I say that because if you look, for example, when marijuana was legalized, I actually sent a letter to the to several cabinet ministers, kind of talking about the opportunity that the legalization of marijuana could bring, like the great benefits. Like, because I mean, there's a lot of people who could have taken that, started these businesses. They could have invested their own money. They would have been hiring, local contractors to kind of build up these businesses. But the government just said, we could do that, or we could just give this to Loblaws. Here you go, guys. Here's all the licenses. Canopy, you get a couple too. And everything's just going to work out. And the reason I think they did that is very sneaky, because they wanted to make sure that the price of marijuana was at a certain level so that it would kind of maximize their revenues. And they didn't realize that through the free market, you might have lost money on the price, but you would have made more money through, it would have been more sales. And instead, they said, nope, we're going to give it to Loblaws, we're going to give it to Canopy, we're going to give it to whoever else has it now. And the sales are down. To an extent. I mean, it says marijuana sales have gone up, but really they could be a lot higher if they hadn't kind of overregulated it. And I mean, if you look at the Marijuana Act, oh wow, it is restrictive. It's the same with the liquor laws. I mean, and we got to talk about the NLC after too. That's another that's a really contentious issue lately, and it's a very interesting one. But I mean, the money that we could have made from this, and the entrepreneurs that we could have created, and the jobs we could have created, would have been a lot more. But the government decided, we just rush it through. We give it to a few big companies who send the money out of province, and that was it. And we lost a lot of money, I think.
It is short-term revenue versus long-term growth. That's exactly what it is. And let's be honest, even before legalization, there's a lot of people that had specific expertise to grow and market marijuana, and not a lot of them were Loblaws executives. So absolutely, and it's something that most provinces have bungled, marijuana legalization. I think Manitoba was the only one that actually did it right by kind of creating free market for marijuana, basically saying, we're going to create a government market to fight the black market. That doesn't work. But rather that we're going to try and take the black market and make them into responsible actors in the free market. And that's the best way to do it, because you have people with an expertise, people that know how to do it, much better than high-priced consultants ever can. And these are the folks that know how to profit from it, ultimately. Yeah. It also reduces the cost for policing as well. So win-win.
Oh no, definitely it does. And I mean, like the biggest problem is that they gave so much of the authority over to the NLC, and I mean, like the NLC it wears too many hats. I mean, like for me, they should have just kind of sold liquor and just basically, are you selling booze to children? No. Okay, great. Keep up the good work. Have a nice day. You can sell your alcohol and your marijuana for whatever price you want. Just do it responsibly, and that would work, because free market economics is key, and I think it's key to the success of not just Newfoundland but the country. And I got to ask you this: like, how do you feel about the proposals to kind of sell off the NLC?
this isn't one I've looked at as much for Newfoundland and Labrador specifically, but I have looked at it elsewhere. And I think it's a good thing. First of all, just from a consumer perspective, sure, the government might not get as much recurring revenue, but it's going to sell it and it's going to have a lot of revenue that can at one point be used to reduce the debt. It will also reduce interest payments. And once again, by reducing the debt at a point where we know interest rates are gonna rise, it's just helping maintain it at a affordable, might not be the right way, but the right word, but a more manageable level. But also just for consumers, the fact is a lot of people like to drink the occasional beer. They like to drink the occasional glass of whiskey, or they like the occasional glass of wine. The fact that it's all controlled by a government monopoly is very harmful, first of all, in terms of choice, because you only have access to the choices that a government monopoly decides to import and put on shelves in a province. And sure, at some point in the past, that might have been more than what a free market would have been able to provide in small communities. But at a time when we've got Amazon, when we've got rapid delivery, I actually don't believe that argument still holds. So there's a whole question of choice, because sure, yes, the government might once again not make as much money every year because they're going to lose one revenue stream. They might still replace it with taxes, but there's a possibility they might not make as much money every year. But we as consumers would all get better choices at more affordable prices, and we'd be able to find exactly the products we like. One thing we're noticing also from government liquor stores like that is that once they see that a product category really works well, they're going to focus on that. They're going to go all in on that, and you're going to get great choices for this. I'm less familiar with Newfoundland and Labrador Liquor Corporation for the choices. One I'm familiar with is the SAQ. If I want to drink some red wine, the SAQ has thousands of red wines. Red wines from France, I think there's like 4,000 of them from France alone at the SAQ. But I happen to be a fan of sake. The SAQ has 27 sake in its entire inventory. It has, 27 different brands of sake. If I like red wine, I'm probably going to be satisfied with SAQ's choices. And sure, there's a couple of things that I might like to try, but I'm not going to get. But if I like something like sake, something that's a little bit more specific, a little bit more niche, I'm not going to find anything. There's no way that such a choice will satisfy me. Now I'm saying sake, but it can be different types of alcohol that people like and they're not able to buy. Off the air, we were chatting a bit about whiskey and scotch. There are very, very specific bottles that you might want to try, and you're never going to find at your local liquor store. The fact that in a world where we have, once again, 24-hour delivery by Amazon, where online shopping is a reality, that we're still stuck with government choices on government shelves for the liquor, absolutely doesn't make sense.
No, I agree. I completely agree. And and that's really essentially how it's kind of a for many other things too, because I mean, like, and especially with Newfoundland, because the government really likes to kind of have their hand in everything. Recently we had with healthcare, and healthcare for Newfoundland is our biggest expense.
Oh, everywhere.
Oh no, definitely. But I mean, but I think here in Newfoundland is what, like 60% of our budget is spent just on healthcare, and the new health accord kind of recommendations. They've been touting UBI as a solution to kind of improving health outcomes, and I mean, I guess if you're going to get some exercise, going to the bank to take out that money. But I mean, I don't really believe in UBI, to be honest. Like I think that it's actually very harmful. And I mean, the other question is, where is Newfoundland going to get this money? We're pretty broke. And as you said, I mean, like the deficit gap is huge. And I mean, UBI is not cheap. And
Lord, no.
So I mean, I don't know how they're going to implement such a thing. I mean, now would I like free money? Sure, great. But I also don't like massive debt.
Absolutely. And let's be clear, there's really two numbers here. The deficit right now is 595 million. But when we look at it long term, based on the fact that there's an aging population, which means higher costs, especially for healthcare, because healthcare costs, it's not a line, it's a curve. It goes up quite fast when people get older. So when we look at an aging population, the impact is going to have on spending. The impact is going to have on revenue as well, because that means less people working, less people paying less taxes. The impact is going to be huge. And that's the number, the long-term deficit that the PBO identifies at 1.7 billion bucks. That's exactly what it is that sustainability gap between what is spent right now and what should be spent for the province not to go further into debt over the next 70 years. So, and this is, once again, it's a very, very long-term kind of thing. And of course, the first thing is if that can go down, if we can get those 600 million bucks that get spent every single year paying interest on that, well, that would go a long way towards closing that 1.7 billion gap. But ultimately, you're right. I think you're right about government wanting to do more, and that's the nature of government. Whenever there's a question, should we do something about this? The government's answer is going to be yes, and it needs to be the government doing it. The fact is, for a lot of things, there's a lot of solutions that can be had by people on the ground, whether they're in not-for-profit organizations, whether they're in some private companies. There are some private companies doing some stuff like that. There's some social enterprise projects that do some very good stuff and are still very profitable. And there's a lot of other options than just government. But whenever the government sees a problem, its first solution is always going to be, how can I do something about this? Instead of how can I help people doing something about this?
Right.
When we were chatting before, you said, you believe in free market solutions, and so do I. But I think free market get a bad rep. I believe in people-powered solutions. I believe in solutions that, once again, come from the bottom and are then imposed on the top, as opposed to top-down solutions that come from confederation building and get imposed on the rest of the people.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And that's something I've told Ernest for a long time. And some of the social sector stuff we don't agree on, because I lean more to the social side. Ernest understands the business side better. Not that I don't understand it, I do. Just I believe in taking care of people. And from my work in nonprofits, in education, I've also worked in the oil field, so I've seen it from all aspects. But there's a reason, and it's going to be a funny analogy, so stick with me. But there's a reason companies try to reduce the amount of taxes they pay and increase the amount of not-for-profit donations they make. Some will say it's for the tax break, but some say their dollars are more effective in the nonprofit world. So that's why when government starts to implement all these programs and they have to do it, then they have to unionize them. Now, I have no problem with unions, but they have to find a worker, and then they have to get another worker, and then another worker. And then all of a sudden you have 4 people doing the same thing. In the nonprofit world, a half a person is doing what those 4 people do.
Yeah.
And they make $1 turn into 10 magically. So if government could just say, listen, we have $10 million for this program, we're going to have, it's going to fall under, say, the Department of Community Service. They can be your advisors. If you need help getting in touch with us, there'll be a couple of advisors there you can deal with. You have free reign of how this is going to work in your community, because a one-size solution does not work in this province, because it is so diverse, it is so broad. I mean, we have a lot of land mass, we have enough roads in Newfoundland to drive to BC with alone.
Yeah.
So we have a very unique situation. So when government says we're going to solve your problem, this is going to be the same solution for everybody, it's not going to work, because you have a low-income person in St. John's, and you have a low-income person in mainland on the Port-au-Port Peninsula, and their problems are completely different.
Yep,
and the
100%.
amount of money to fix their problems are completely different. But the government just throws it at them and says, this is what it is, this is how we fix it. And it actually makes everything worse, because it takes their quality of life, it throws it out the window, it takes their self-esteem, it throws it out the window, and they say, I cannot find a fix to my solution. And most of the time they take it into their own hands, and it is a colossal failure on everyone's part. If that money could somehow be transferred into the nonprofits, or into the business community and let it be done from the bottom up, Newfoundland would be debt-free a lot quicker than we can be right now with the approach we're taking.
It would be.
Absolutely. No, sorry, go ahead.
No. Like it's kind of like tying in with what Lenny said. I mean, like if you want to, I remember Ronald Reagan said something once that the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help."
Yeah.
And it's really true. Like I believe that like Lenny, that there are things that the private and the non-for-profit section can do. I believe that there's things that religious organizations can do, and they do a lot of good. They do have a lot of programs that help the homeless and people kind of less fortunate get on their feet. The Salvation Army and these other kinds of groups. And I mean, like I'm an ex-oil worker myself. Same with Lenny. I mean, we both worked in the oil industry. I've been involved in volunteer groups. I still am. I serve in kind of a few other things as well. So I mean, like I've seen the benefits of it, but I mean, you also see the effects of too much government. I mean, the food banks in Newfoundland and Labrador have seen a drastic increase, and the government, instead of sitting kind of being like, why are so many people having to use these food banks? Why are they complaining about, why are they not, driving their cars so much? Maybe if only there was something we could do to make this a little bit better. Oh, I know. Let's offer them, like I said, UBI or something like that. Let's I don't know, offer a new beer through our government-funded, our government-run liquor corporations or things like that. Like, there's no interest in really kind of getting people out of poverty and into the workforce. Like they really don't. They have there's certain things that they tie it towards. Like they have the advanced education and skills programs and that. So it gets people who work enough unemployment hours, and then they can get so much funding for trade school. And trade schools are awesome. I have a skilled trade, but it's not everything. I mean, it's supply and demand. And if you glut the market with, too many heavy equipment operators, the wages are going to go down because I can get a heavy equipment operator everywhere, and the demand is not going to be there. So people are not going to be in the workforce like that. So you're going to get out of school and you're going to be in the exact same place. So they need to be able to give people lessons in entrepreneurship. They need to give them basic financial kind of training, proposal writing, things like that. And I find that the government, they don't think about these things, and at the end of the day, we pay for it.
I don't think it's that they don't. I think it's that they're not able to do so properly. And I really want to expand on that. There's first off, there's one thing you said, Lenny, that really got to me. And so just a bit of background. I describe myself as a classical liberal, not in the Justin Trudeau, but in the Adam Smith tradition. I'm more on the libertarian side of things, of course. And there's kind of there's this joke going around in libertarian circles, like kind of it all started when he ran. For me, it all started with Karl Marx. The reason is, and there's this unfortunately deceased econ prof from the US that said it best, I think, called Steve Horowitz, who said, I'm a libertarian because I care about the poor and I don't care about your intentions. And that's exactly how I would describe myself in this. And that's why I'm saying I came at it from sort of Karl Marx. I worry a lot about a lot of social justice issues. I'm definitely on the left on those things. I just don't agree with your solutions. And that's exactly the thing. First of all, just from a government debt perspective, even if government was one way to take care of this, the fact is, at this time, what is happening in Newfoundland and Labrador with a significant deficit, with its even bigger long-term deficit of $1.7 billion, what it's doing right now is putting a lot of it on the credit card for future generations to pay. This is effectively mortgaging future generations' ability to care for their own in the future. So just from a pure accounting perspective, there's an issue with the amount of debt that's being taken on, because it does jeopardize social programs in the future. But to the point you're making, that both of you were making about kind of centralization, how it doesn't really work, I think government employees are going at it from their best of intentions. The only thing is, I don't think someone in Confederation Building in St. John's knows better than someone living in Goose Bay or Corner Brook with Stephenville, what the people of Goose Bay, Corner Brook with Stephenville actually need.
Yes.
And this kind of goes a bit with your regionalization episodes, which quite frankly I think were quite good, but about giving a lot more power back to the more localized entities that actually know better what stuff is like on the ground, but also to what we're saying here about giving a lot more space for non-government organizations, for not-for-profits, for charities, for church groups, for companies as well, for social enterprises, to fulfill a lot of those mandates and actually help people better because they actually know what the reality is on the ground. When a program gets conceived in Confederation Building, it gets thought of by bureaucrats that live in St. John's with the best of intention, based on what they see as aggregate data for all of Newfoundland and Labrador. But all of Newfoundland and Labrador is 520,000 people. It's easy to try and do one aggregate, but one aggregate doesn't represent every single individual of those 520,000 people. And ultimately, that's what giving a lot more power back to regional centers, that's what decentralizing does. And that's also what it actually brings it to its base level when you do it not in the sense of giving more power to local government, but in giving more money and more power back to the people themselves that are the smallest minority.
Yeah, I would agree. And like, I listened to another podcast called the Hurley Burley and the Curse of Politics, and on the Hurley Burley once he interviewed Lisa Wright, and I'm trying to remember what her name is. I want to say it was Anne McClellan, but I don't think that's the right name. She was a singer, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was a singer, I believe. I think she did that one episode where she was on the Trailer Park Boys.
There was Anne somebody who was involved with the Liberal government for years, and they created this coalition and said there's two groups now in Canada that gets listened to: the far left and the far right. So you have about, between both of them, 20% of Canada gets all the media attention, all the coverage, and all the policy is based around that. You have 80% of Canada that nobody listens to anymore and have no home in any political party. Because on the left and on the right, there are a lot of people that are centrists. Like myself, I'm very libertarian. Listen, you want to have a fire in the backyard? I don't care, go ahead. You want to build a shed? Fuck it, whatever. It's your land. Build a shed. Don't interfere with a man in his land. Now, if there's a town water line running to your house and you're paying for those services and it breaks and it's on your land, well, then yes, you have to pay for it, of course. But it's not my job as government to tell you what you can and cannot do. So I'm very libertarian on that front. And the hardest thing I find, and it's funny that the mentality is there's enough people left in our hometown that a lot of people are lifers. They were born here, they were raised here, or they ever only lived in Newfoundland. There's nothing wrong with that. Growing up, that was the dream. I wish I could have stayed here and lived here and never had to move and lived in this land where everything in Newfoundland was excellent. That wasn't in the cards for me. I went to Alberta 2 or 3 times. My last stint lasted 4.5 years. But to look at the policy difference and how things are done in Alberta, which is not perfect, and in Newfoundland, which is further from not perfect, it's incredible. I mean, on one street in Fort McMurray had 3 liquor stores owned by 3 different people, 3 different supply chains. Motor registration. I remember when I bought my first car, he's like, you have to go to motor registration and get a plate. And I was like, all right, well, I'll see you tomorrow then. I'll be back. He's like, what are you talking about? He said, go down the road to CAA. You'll be back here in 15 minutes. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, He's like, motor registration in Alberta has its own offices, but also have private offices where they've contracted things out to private businesses to do this as well. You can get your registration, your plates, everything. If you have a question, you can go there to a private entity and figure it out. In Newfoundland, I will give you an example. So I run an accessibility advisory committee for the town of Steveville, and that is one of my roles as a councillor. We have a provincial courthouse in this town that is not wheelchair accessible at all, and it's about 3 stories high. You cannot. So if you have a car or a vehicle and you have an impairment and you can't get upstairs, you have to call and make an appointment, and someone will come outside and meet with you, or pick a location to meet with you. If you have to go to court, they will book a ballroom in the local hotel to hold your court session. It is absolutely insane. And this is the building, the most accessible building in Newfoundland, should be motor registration. It is in the courthouse on the 2nd floor.
It should be, but that's also the bane of large organizations.
Right.
And that's exactly what government is. And let's be clear, very large corporations are not more efficient than very large governments. They're not, they don't have a special thing making them more efficient. The fact is, the larger an organization is, the more different missions it's going to have, the more bureaucratic it's going to have to be, just to make sure that every single one of those different divisions can speak to one another. When you take an organization like a government that takes care of healthcare, education, roads, justice, business investment nowadays, apparently, because that's a thing, and the list goes on. When you've got an organization that takes care of all these things that are completely and totally separate, making sure that it can communicate from one division to another is excessively hard. And that's why it is so inefficient to centralize. It's not because government is bad and private is good. That's not even it. It's simply that larger is often less efficient. There's a place, there's a point where you reach a point where you're less efficient. And the more missions you add, the faster you reach that point. So making it more decentralized makes it more efficient. And also, of course, closer to the people and what the people actually need.
Exactly. And when we had former Minister of Education, Dale Kirby, on the show, that's what he alluded to. When not that he was a fan of denominational school districts, but when all the schools in Newfoundland were segregated upon denomination, everybody had a board. And then they got together in the early 90s and said, no, this is not going to work. All our kids play together. This is not a big a deal as it was before. So the United Baptists could play with a Catholic. So it just worked better. We all played with each other. It didn't matter what our religious stripe was. So they went into regional school districts. There were still boots on the ground. They were familiar with the area, and it worked. Then it came along and they said, well, let's have the Newfoundland and Labrador in their school district. And just disclaimer, these aren't my words. Hope to God I don't get fired for saying this, but this is what Dale Kirby said, is once they went to one board and they centralized it, the disconnection started to come throughout the province. And the programs that were offered in urban Newfoundland weren't the same opportunities you could get in rural Newfoundland. When before, when they were regionalized, they could get it because they would have a school representative. Somebody was always on the ground. But when you centralize something, you miss a huge component of people and issues and problems that you're missing, and ideas for that matter, because there's lots of things that happen that they'll come to the West Coast, for example, like a government board will come to the West Coast and do a strategic development plan or a town hall, and well, that's very unique. We haven't heard that before. But then when the final report comes out, it's just catered right to the avenue.
Well, and to be fair, and I've been a listener to this podcast for the past couple of weeks since you guys have reached out to me, and maybe you don't want to toot your own horns on your podcast, but please let me do it because I absolutely love it. I read a bunch of newspapers every morning, and we were chatting about this offline before, but I read a bunch of newspapers every morning, just because I cover a lot of different provinces. And to try and get an understanding of what's happening in Newfoundland and Labrador, what I'm going to read is the news on VOCM on the website. I'm going to read CBC Newfoundland, and I'm going to read the Telegram. But all of those are based in St. John's. I don't get to hear from Stephenville. I don't get to hear from Corner Brook, from Gander, from Goose Bay. And St. John's, it's huge. It is 50% of the province, something like that. But there's another 60 or 50 that I don't get to hear from. And that's what I like about this podcast, is I actually get to hear some more regional perspectives. It's helping me get a better understanding of Newfoundland and Labrador politics. And I assume anyone who's listening is probably likes it for those reasons as well. But I really wanted to make sure that I mentioned this, because it is very, very good stuff.
Well, we appreciate it. I mean, we do have a few like listeners from around. There's one actually from Germany. We've been trying to figure out who this is. There's always this one download, because we can see everyone who listens. And there's this one person from Frankfurt who just constantly listens. And I really want to know who they are and just ask them why. I mean, why?
Maybe they work for Deutsche Bank and they're looking at buying Newfoundland and Labrador bonds and trying to see how reasonable it is.
No, listen, guys, we got to delete this episode right now, because as soon as they hear this, as soon as they see this one, they're going to run. The plan is blown.
Imagine that tomorrow morning, Moody's announces a D grade for the government of Newfoundland and Labrador based on the podcast.
I tell you the truth, like all the time, I always keep expecting sooner or later I'm going to hear our bond ratings get degraded again, because I mean, like we're good at kind of treading the water a little bit and making excuses, but we're not really good at boosting kind of investor confidence in Newfoundland. And funny thing is that the government of Newfoundland has this website, Engage NL, so it asks opinion on a various things. Literally everything they talk about with the budgets and realization, I literally put down, tax me less. That because it whenever, especially when they talk about the minimum wage, that's the one they're talking about now, raising the wage. And I right now, I made enough money in Alberta that I'm okay for a while, but I work what used to be a not minimum wage job, but now it is a minimum wage job. And so every time I hear the wage is going to go up to this or go up to that, in April it's going up to this other amount, and I was like, oh crap, that means all my prices are going to go up in addition to what they already are. And the government is just like, well, listen, you're going to get more money in your pocket. And I've said to people, well, if you just taxed me less, I would also have a little bit more money in my pocket.
Right.
And I would actually be able to put it back into the economy. But now that you're not, I'm going to have to compensate now, because now fuel is going up. And I'd say next week, fuel in Newfoundland is going to be at least $1.85. The food is very expensive. And everything is just going up. Like even where I'm selling, like we were selling like brake fluid was there, and it was for a couple of months ago, it was $13.
Yeah.
Now it's $20. And that's not from us. We didn't want to do that, but the supplier came down and said, hey, this is the price.
I mean, before we get on that, because I do want to get on that, there's one thing I got to mention. You were talking about bond ratings and stuff like that. I'm actually a little bit familiar with it. I did work a bit. It was a project we were working on to try and better understand provincial bond ratings. But one of the things that actually gets Newfoundland and Labrador the better bond rating than what it would have is the fact that Moody's, which is one of the large bond ratings agencies, actually considers the fact that the federal government has a decent enough bond rating as a mitigating factor for the provincial bond ratings, because as they put it, they kind of expect the federal government to come into a province's rescue. And when you read their reports, whenever they say like this province has this bond rating, they actually say that the rating they have based on their calculations is about 2 ratings lower, but is brought up by 2 ratings because of the Fed's position. So it has an impact. And what this means is that if you take the government of Newfoundland and Labrador as a standalone, it is a lot less solvent than it seems like it is right now. And that goes back to that point about very large debt, about a 1.7 billion long-term deficit, not just a 595 right now, but a $1.7 billion gap between what is sustainable spending and the current level of spending. But to your point, it might seem counterintuitive, but people shouldn't care how much money they have in their pocket. They should care about what they're able to buy with it. This is more of a personal hobby for me. I actually have a collection of dollars from failed currencies. This is actually in my living room. I've got some Venezuelan bolivars and a bunch of stuff like that. And basically, I've got some very large denominations on my wall. And what's kind of funny, or actually, well, sad, but also kind of funny when you think about it, is that when you look at all the denominations of this wall, together they're worth less than 1 cent Canadian. What I have here is actually a $10 trillion Zimbabwean bill.
I have one of those somewhere in my house.
Yeah, which is, worth less than 1 cent Canadian. And this is the thing about exactly what you were saying with minimum wage hikes. Sure, the wage is going up, but first of all, that's removing a couple of rungs from the ladder, making it harder for people to start having employment and to get to better jobs. And hiking the minimum wage when you have a 13% unemployment rate might not be the best thing to do. When you have a 2% unemployment rate, maybe there's a debate to be had. At 13%, maybe not the best thing to do. But the fact is, it doesn't actually mean that people are going to be able to buy more. What it means is that the prices are going to go up. People are going to be able to buy less. And a lot of people are going to be pushed down on the ladder and actually are going to be able to afford less. And that's also what we've seen right now. We have record high inflation in this country. We've got a 5.1% annual inflation. For people that don't follow this, the last time we had 5.1% annual inflation was in 1991. I wasn't even born at that time. It is excessively high. It means all the prices are going up. And sure, our salaries are going up, but they're not keeping the same pace. They're not going up by 5.1%.
Well,
No,
I know. Well, we've talked about UBI. Another idea that's been gaining traction in Newfoundland and Labrador is as jobs become automated and there's less demand for a workforce as there is today, something will have to be done. But right now, there's still jobs available for people to work. So 20 to 30 years, if robots are doing mostly what we can do, then there's a conversation to be had. But what has been said is if you think that the UBI should be $25,000, well, why are we giving you checks for $25,000 a year when we could just take the minimum tax credit that you get on your taxes and put it at $25,000 a year? Does it not solve the same problem, but ever handing out a cent, but putting more money back in your pocket that you don't have to work any harder, and it'll encourage people to work? Because part of what we've seen was the abuse of the CERB system. Now, I seem like an asshole when I'm saying this, and I always feel bad because of that social side of me. There are people that can't help themselves, either permanently or in the moment, who need a social program. My father's a quadriplegic. There's very little things that he can do as a paid working job, so he needs the social assistance. He needs that to live. Those programs need to stay in place. But what we've seen is when people lose their jobs temporarily, and we just throw something at them, where there is no intention that once your job comes back, you have to go back. But now here's, what was it, $2,000 a month, $4,000 a month?
It was about 2,000, and I know that because trust me, when CERB came out, a lot of businesses like mine, they did a roaring trade by people who generally before never paid the full price, because usually there'd be a lot of haggling and things like that. But there'd be guys coming into my stores and they'd be like, "Hey," I'll be like, "How much is this?" "Oh, it's $100."
Like
Brand
we
new.
Yeah.
we went to a curling tournament in a place, a provincial championship. We walked into a Subway,
Mhm.
and I was with I won't call him prominent, but a well-known business owner in our area. We were on the same team, and I said, "Hey, look at the sign." They were so desperate for a workforce, and this was in October, that they would give you a $500 signing bonus just to go to work at Subway
Yeah.
because there was no guarantee. So
Mhm.
some people, $25,000. That's it. That's all I need, man. I'm good. Like for me, that's not going to work for me. I have too many irons in the fire. I have to travel too much. 25 grand is not going to go very far. But if you give people the incentive not to work, some of them will take it. Not all, but some of them will take it.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to say, yeah, not everybody's going to do it. Some people love what they do enough and are going to keep doing it, and that's good.
Right.
But there are definitely some people that are going to be affected by it and are going to choose not to work, and that's very true. On UBI, I'm a huge fan of this economist from the University of BC called Kevin Milligan. He's a guy that costed the 2015 Liberal platform. I know, not great, but he's a very good economist. And on UBI, he says UBI can be two of three things. It can be significant enough so that it helps people in all kinds of situations. It can have a big enough clawback rate that it doesn't become an impediment to work. Or it can be affordable. And it can be two of those three things, and you need to pick two. The fact is, right now, and a lot of our social programs are very expensive, but they're a lot less expensive than giving checks to everybody. And the fact is, there's also, once again, if we want it to be affordable and significant enough, it is possible. But the clawback is going to be so fast that it's not going to help anybody. It's not going to be a significant enough amount to help anybody. Right. It's only going to help people that have literally no work or no income. Because if all you're doing is that for every additional dollar of income, you get $2 of benefits that are cut, you don't have any incentive to go back to work.
Right.
Yeah. Or if we try and make it affordable and have a slow enough clawback, there's a lot of people that are not going to be covered adequately. You know, I don't want to make too much use of the point you were making, but someone that has a handicap wouldn't be able to function with $500 a year. There's a minimal cost of living that people have. There are things that people need that are in specific situations that can't be afforded on $500 a year. So there's really, the UBI is one of those solutions that tries and catches everything, but actually fails to catch most things.
And in Newfoundland and Labrador, I'll bring up 2 points. So I'll use this example just because it's the simplest example I can use on my first point. If you have a single mother who has a child, who once that child goes to school, wants to go to work, if she gets a job from 7 to 3 or 9 to 3, while that child is in school, our social assistance program says we are going to call back immediately, dollar for dollar, everything you make when you go to work. You will lose your credit for childcare, and you need to figure it out from this point on.
Yeah.
So that single mom says, okay, well, this is bad because I won't be able to take care of my child. And this is what I talked about earlier, how we just rip people's self-worth right out of them. Instead of saying, we're glad that you're planning, that you want to go back to work, you've got a job, we're going to do everything we can until you're on your feet sustainable to make sure that this is going to work. So if that's paying for after-school care so she can work longer, if that's just making sure that the assistance check that she's getting is there to compensate while she builds up a savings. Let the work build up the savings so she can work her way up, get the wage that's required for her to live day to day, and now she has the savings built up. And I feel the exact same way. There's no incentive even if you are down on your luck, and you end up going on the program, there's never an incentive to get off it. They actually make it difficult to remove yourself.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
instead of saying, okay, you're on this, let's get you in touch with a social worker, let's see what's going on here, addictions issues or mental health issues, or you're just having a hard time, let's put the resources in place in the interim. Let's build you back up. If it's retraining you need to go back to school, we'll pay for your tuition to a certain amount, and we'll do all this to get you off the system so you become a contributing member of society that most people want to be. The second point is when minimum wage went up in Newfoundland this past year, and Ernest was affected by this, and many, many others. We have a prescription drug program in Newfoundland and Labrador for people who work but don't have any benefits, who don't make enough to pay for all the drugs they may need if they get sick. A wonderful program. Mm-hmm. But what happened is they put minimum wage up. They didn't do the adjustment levels in any of the social programs. About 3 weeks later, everyone got a letter. You're no longer qualified for the provincial drug program because now you make too much money.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a friend who has like ADHD, and they need like, Ritalin and things like that. And Ritalin is definitely not cheap. It can be expensive, and they were kind of telling me like how am I going to be able to afford this on minimum wage now? And their problem was that they worked an extra like 6 hours a week. That was what put them over their spending. By the way, I got to say this really quickly. You collect the currency from these kind of countries, and that I have in my hand a Peruvian inti. From the this one here, goodness, when is this one even made? This was from 1974, but this actually fell out of use after a fellow named Alan Garcia. And if you want to listen to bad governance, Google this guy. He was bad. Flattened the economy. And then got and this is kind of what's impacted my or kind of formed a lot of my economics education, because I've spent some time in South America, and I've seen the Venezuelan situation for not firsthand, but I've seen it on the streets of Peru, and that I've heard about the inflation, and I have friends who were affected by that. I had a friend who was a doctor in Venezuela, and told me that the average Venezuelan doctor made $13 a month, which is a terrifyingly low amount of money.
Yeah.
And now they're in Uruguay making a fair bit more. But no, like for me, my priority, if I was to be in government, is to say like we need people working. That is critical. If people are working, they're spending money. If they're spending money, there's new businesses coming up. There's new supply to kind of meet the demand, and with that comes lowering prices, because that competition is the best way to do that. You have more affordable housing, you have more investments, you have competition for wages, so you don't need to have the government saying there, well, no,
yeah. Just look at the price of booze at NL Liquor versus what you're going to get in the US if you go. Like the difference is stark.
Quebec even.
The difference in
Quebec
Newfoundland and Quebec
for beer.
Is insane.
Yes.
Yeah, but for beer specifically, the rest is kind of banned. But yeah, like there's a reason why Canada would only allow you to bring back 2 bottles of something when you go on vacation.
Yeah,
it's a very big difference.
I spent some time with the Canadian Federation of Students while I was in CNA and running the students' union, and we were in Gatineau. It's the first time I ever went to Quebec. Now, some people say you're not really in Quebec if you're in Gatineau. You're in Ottawa.
Oh, there's dippenard and chip beers. Trust me, you are.
It was amazing. I made a few mistakes. The waitress asked me if I wanted something one night, and I went "we" because I was trying to be culturally appropriate. "We" is the only French word I know. She started speaking to me in French. She was like, "Oh, I regret this decision," immediately, and apologized to her profusely. And she laughed. She's like, "Well, at least you tried." But we finished meetings one day. It was stressful. We were meeting from 9 o'clock in the morning till about 8:30 at night. Only broke for lunch. And I said, let's go to a corner shop. Let's just try to go somewhere that's not Starbucks or not the hotel. I walked into this little mom and pop shop, and I thought I died and went to heaven. There was this beer bottle that was about yay high and about yay around for like $7 or $8, and it was like a liter and a half. I'm like, this is incredible. Every night of the week, that's all I drank while I was there. I would go to this store and buy one of these. I'm like, I'm good. Let's go.
You know, so the worst part is it could be cheaper. We still have a minimum price of beer in Quebec. There's still a government floor price.
Oh,
it
wow.
could actually be cheaper. And I think, look, if so for beer, you can buy it at any corner store. So we still have the SAQ that forces our choices when it comes to wine or spirits. But for beer, you can buy it in the grocery store, at the Max. You can actually go and fill up, do a fill up at a gas station while you're buying beer.
We can do the same. We thought we were the only place in the world that could do that.
Yeah, like there's and what's really sad to me, I guess, as we kind of like kind of wrap everything up here, is that it's the legislation in not just in liquor, but in so many other kind of aspects is very, very restrictive. And I mean, and it's like you said, you know, it could be cheaper. And that's kind of a motto. I think that's almost like a motto that everyone should have when referring to government. It could be cheaper. Certain, like the delivery of certain services could be a lot cheaper, because we really don't get our bang for our buck. And that's why, like, especially in terms of like education, like I've read a bit of Milton Friedman. Like I read Capitalism and Freedom, and that is a great book. I really want to get the Ron Paul books on kind of education in terms of like school vouchers and that, because that's a very interesting thing that I'd like to learn about, because the way I see it is that educational outcomes and economic outcomes are well, that's common sense. They are tied together, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So I mean, like, we need to find a way where we can kind of tell government, or convince them, I should say, and that comes through, you know, electing people who are, you know, interested in that kind of strategy, who want to follow that kind of plan, and be like, listen, you know, let us do more shit. This is the rare time you'll ever hear me swear on this podcast. You know, I'm having such a good time that I'm actually swearing. It's amazing. You know, Lenny usually has the monopoly on it, but I've broken it.
Well, shit, I haven't said a single swear word so far.
I know.
But honestly, I think you're right. But if I may bring it to a point, before we end, a point we said we might talk about, and I'd really encapsulate this need for stuff to be cheaper, is a pop tax, because it's exactly this kind of solution. It is, once again, like people in Confederation building trying to identify a problem and putting a one-size-fits-all solution to it. And honestly, your national experience on pub taxes, it's laughable. It shows these things doesn't work.
Right.
And yet the premier's still going ahead with it.
Right. Most lower income families, they feel strapped. They have to buy what is affordable to them. And I remember the argument was, don't tax the pot, make the water cheaper. Make the produce cheaper. Make it more financially attractive for that, and you'll have a better outcome.
I mean, absolutely. But even, let's say that you buy into the government's argument that they want to reduce obesity in Newfoundland and Labrador, and that the real culprit here is pop. Consumption of pop is not exactly trending up. There's a bit of data I looked at, but StatsCan does these surveys every 11 years called dietary surveys. Between 2004 and 2015, these are the latest two surveys, consumption of pop went down by 25% in Newfoundland and Labrador. There was no pop tax. You know, you'd think obesity must have gone down by maybe not the same percentage, but a little bit. Well, no, obesity went up by 5 points, from 34 to 39%. So already pop consumption is trending down, and then they're coming with this tax on it. It's not like this tax is going to have a lot of an effect.
Right.
The other thing is the tax there's three ways to which people with which people respond to the tax. First one, people are wealthy enough; they're not going to change their buying habit. You know, they like their can of Coke. They're going to keep buying a can of Coke or a can of Pepsi. They're just going to eat the tax, pay a little bit more, and they're going to put less money in their savings. They're going to be fine with it. In this case, you know, you're no effect on obesity, literally no effect.
Yeah.
Second thing, substitution, but in the same category. This means that instead of buying your 2 liters of Pepsi that your kids enjoy, you're going to buy 2 liters of PC Choice Cola. It's going to be cheaper, but even with the tax, you're going to get to about the same price you're paying now for your bottle of Pepsi, maybe even a little bit less, and you'll just keep buying that. Effect on obesity, once again, 0. Or there's the other one. It's also substitution, but in a different category. You don't want to pay the extra tax for pop. I get it. So instead, what are you going to do? You're going to buy a bag of chips. You're going to buy some chocolates. You're going to buy something else. You're still going to keep eating the same thing. It's not the fact is a pop tax and it doesn't address the root cause. It doesn't address the fact that people take more calories than they spend in a day. It doesn't do any of that. It just targets a specific product, tries to make a scapegoat out of it, and then brings in a bunch of government revenue, 8.7 million a year based on recent estimates. And that's straight from your pockets.
And that's all it's about. This is a way to try to pay down the deficit. And,
but it's not even a good one.
No, it's not.
Deficit is like 585 million. It's not 8.7 million that's going to make a difference.
Like if you want to reduce the deficit, put the money where it's needed. Stop spending where it's not.
Exactly.
Keep the money in healthcare. Put the money in education. Put the things that are going to give you long-term economic and health benefits. Put the money there and stop spending it on the rest.
Absolutely.
Like we literally said, in 1 week we were broke. Spent $130,000 on chair design, if not more. And,
I know.
And then
it's for tourism, okay? It's tourism.
Yes, well, exactly, right? It's tourism dollars. And then created a position that we were told was once in effect and never was, as a premier advisor in central Newfoundland, where there's one Liberal MHA, I believe maybe 2, a Conservative MP, and a very popular Progressive Conservative MHA. So you tell me why that person is there.
You know, honestly, that chair story to me says a lot. Because I still remember the quote from the tourism minister that was trying to defend it and saying, no, this is about tourism. I have yet to find a single kid that says, Mom and Dad, I don't want to go to Newfoundland, to Disneyland. I want to go to Newfoundland and Labrador to see some $130,000 couches in the old legislature. That's exactly, I've yet to hear that. I don't think a cheaper couch for heck, even $5,000 would have had a difference on tourism dollars on this, honestly. I'm a huge history buff. Like Lenny does this. I'm a huge nerd on history. And like for me, if I went to the Colonial Building, I want to go and see like where one of the prime minister of Newfoundland was chased out by an angry mob. I want to see, the office where the prime ministers used to sit. I don't want to go in and be like, oh, look at that lovely chair. I'm going to just stay here and gaze upon this overpriced chair. That funny thing is, people did some digging online, and they could have got it from Wayfair for like $30,000 or $40,000 less. It was the exact same chair, but like everything government gets, like I said, my family worked in government. And everything the government tenders, the price just goes up because you know why? You can get that price. And especially it doesn't hurt if you have a friend who might know the minimum price that they're willing to go. And usually it is higher than the standard. And I mean, that's a huge thing. Like the other thing we don't really talk about in terms of like cost reduction is the size of the Newfoundland public service. It's huge. It's massive. I think Newfoundland government is the largest employer in the province, actually, if I'm not mistaken. It might be, but to be fair, every single provincial government is the largest employer in their province, and that's always something I find kind of funny when I hear people say, the undue influence that large private businesses have. There's nothing bigger than the government in any single province. Just look at the amount of money that gets taxed every single year as a share of the economy. There's nothing bigger than government. There's no industry. For Newfoundland and Labrador, taxes represented 31% of GDP. Now, GDP is one of those terms we throw around a lot. GDP can be sort of summed up as the totality of all the wages paid in the province, plus the corporate profits, plus all basic, or actually even simpler, the value of all goods and services that are bought in the province, whether it is by government, by individuals, or by corporations. The value of all goods and services bought by people over the course of a year, 31% of that goes to various degrees of government via taxes, via fees, via all those kind of things. There's nothing bigger. Even oil and gas in Newfoundland is a mere 25% of GDP compared to the government's 31%. There's nothing that's bigger than that.
Renaud, did you have anything else for us? Any more research? Any more?
There's maybe one last point I want to leave you guys on. Still on the pop tax. And if you really wanted any example of why the pop tax is once again an elitist tax grab. So, if you buy a bottle of Pepsi, one of those 500 something milliliter bottles, you're going to have to pay a tax as of September, right? It's a 20 cents a liter tax. But if you go to Starbucks and buy one of those really fancy lattes, the ones that are like 70% sugar, a little bit of coffee, actually 70% sugar, 25% whipped cream, and maybe like 2% coffee, those are not taxed. There's an exemption in the sugar sweetened beverage tax. There's an exemption for any coffee drink prepared at the point of sale. So your $5 Starbucks peppermint mocha is not going to get taxed. Meanwhile, your $1 bottle of Pepsi is going to get taxed. And when you look at the calorie count, do you know which one is worse? It's a Starbucks latte. A bottle of Pepsi has 240 calories. The Starbucks latte has 540. And yet the Starbucks latte isn't taxed.
Wow.
It's a tax trap.
I know. It is. It serves two purposes. It's the tax and it's optics. It looks good. It says, look at us, guys. We're making sure that your child is no longer grossly overweight. He might play all those video games and not really get off the couch, but we're helping him a little bit more. He's going to lose 0.5 of a kilo. That's awesome.
Honestly, I call that cocktail policy making. That's the sort of thing that at a fancy cocktail where you're drinking either a cocktail or a glass of wine or a glass of beer or something, you can say, oh, no, I really care about obesity, which is why I think we need to tax the thing that poor people get. It's exactly what this is. This is a tax on middle class. It's a tax on low-income people, middle class people. And there's a carve out specifically for those that can afford $5 latte every day.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
I gotta say, this is probably one of our longer episodes in recent memory, because I'm really learning. I'm enjoying myself.
So am I.
We really got to get you on again, probably in the future. I'd love to have you on again, especially when the budget comes down. I would really like to have you on that, because fun fact, this is how this podcast actually really started. It was Lenny, was it the 2015 budget?
I think so.
This budget, me and Lenny got together and did a podcast trying to go over the 2015 budget, which was, to say the least, a shit show of a budget. It was terrifying.
It's a government budget. What do you expect?
Oh, trust me, this was the bad one. This was bad. They even had a deficit levy and everything. It was horrifying. It actually got the finance minister so much flack. She ended up having a press conference, crying. It was very, very, very. Oh yeah, it was very toxic. Like the names that they were calling her and that, because people were just angry, because nobody liked the way they had portrayed it. But no, like
at
me
one
and Lenny
point,
sat down.
there was a tax to come to Newfoundland, and the big joke was,
yes,
there was a liberal retreat on George Street. Someone paid a cover to go to a bar and said, "God damn it, that'd be perfect. If you come to the province, you're going to pay a cover charge."
Oh Lord.
Oh yeah, like I'll have to send you some articles or something on it. It was horrifyingly bad. But like me and Lenny got together on this budget. We spent what was it, like 3 hours drinking beer and complaining about this god awful budget. The episode never aired because there was something wrong with the uploading of the episode, and it just crashed. And that was a hard day. But then we decided we're going to try this, and this year has actually been our most consistent year. Like this brand of it, and it's been, we're getting a lot of very good guests. We have yourself here now, and I like I said earlier, I would love to have you on for the budget. Because I mean that would, and we can all have a beer. It'll be just like the whole time for me and Lenny, and we'll make sure that it gets put through this time.
I mean, I wouldn't consider myself a very good guest. I'd say well behaved, maybe not very good, but I'd be happy. I'd be happy to do it. Actually, if you guys are in St. John's for the budget, I'd be happy to meet up for a beer and do it live.
I might not be for this one. Next year's budget, I definitely would be, if you're still having it, because I mean it would be good. I know a few very good places to grab a drink.
I also still need to get Screeched in, so that's the thing that's on the list.
Would be awesome.
We'll have to sneak you into Stephenville for a bit and get you Screeched. Lenny, we got to take him to the Derby. We got to take him to the Derby.
Yes.
Yep. So we'll tell you about this after. This is the best place to get Screeched in, but I mean,
perfect.
It was wonderful having you on. Thank you so much. And you have made this a very good Friday for us both. Thank you.
Honestly, I'll accept the thanks, but thanks to you as well. As I said, I absolutely love the podcast. Discovered it recently when you guys reached out, and have listened to a few episodes since. It is absolutely wonderful. It was my absolute pleasure to be here tonight, and I'll let me know when you guys want to do this for the budget, because I'm ready.
Awesome.
All right, thank you.
That is awesome, and I'll echo Ernest's sentiments. I've been a long time listener. Well, not that the podcast has been around that long for the Taxpayers Federation either, but I have listened to most every episode, and I have followed for many years, especially living in Alberta. Was a big fan, still am. Not as popular to say some of the things in Newfoundland and Labrador as I'd like, but we are getting there.
We're working on it.
Yes, and that's no fault of. We've had the same issue since 1949, and as the generations get older, as the generations progress, we're slowly getting away from that. But we've come up with unique ways to still accomplish the same goal, just cheaper. But on behalf of the In the Trenches podcast, I want to thank you wholeheartedly on myself, behalf of Ernest, and to our listeners out there. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoy this episode. And until next week, Newfoundland and Labrador, hold fast. We're almost out of this thing. March 14th is coming faster than you know. And cross your fingers that holds true. So good night, Newfoundland and Labrador. Cheers.